Bay Tourism folk, the good patient folk from Hawke's Bay Tourism. And long time no see, Chairman George, good to see you here again. It's on page 39. So good morning and welcome, and hand over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora tātou, nau rata mihi, kua hui mai nei, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Good morning, councillors. Thanks again for the opportunity of presenting our quarterly report. Just by way of a change, I thought I might start by reflecting on a couple of aspects of the tourism industry, because sometimes we can get buried in the detail of what we do, but it's a question of what we're trying to achieve as well. And Annie's going to talk through some of our activity, but more importantly, some of the stuff that we're planning to do from here on in. And I thought it's probably worth considering just why it is we do what we do, and think about what we do and what we've achieved. And throughout a number of these meetings, a number of councillors have raised the issue with us is how do we know that what we're doing is making an impact? And can we compare the impact we're making with what's happening in some of the other regions? So I've just got a wee table that I'll share with you today. But just to come back a step, as you've probably heard over the last little while, tourism's in a pretty good shape at the moment. It's been used as a softening message to offset what's happening in the dairy industry, and suddenly tourism is again New Zealand's major industry. And clearly it's something that as a region we want to make sure we become part of it. We've now gone past about 3.1 million visitors a year. To put that in context, when I first started in tourism as in Tourism New Zealand, it was about 1.5 million, so it's doubled in about the last 15 years. And that's expected to continue. So the key issue for us is to ensure that we as a region maintain an active part in a burgeoning tourism industry so that we're able to obviously get the economic returns. And there are two parts to that are crucial. And one is what we try and do is ensure that when people are thinking about a place to go for their holiday, they think about the Hawke's Bay region. And the way it works in destination management is in destination marketing is you want to ensure that your region or your product is in people's choice set. And everybody has a choice set when it comes to holidays. They don't think of everything. They think of a few things and then make a choice between them. And the best way I can describe that is a number of people in about 3 or 4 months' time will be thinking of some form of holiday in a warm location. All New Zealanders do it. And they'll probably say, yes, I wouldn't mind a week away in the sun, and I'll go, my choice set will be Rarotonga, Fiji or Noosa. Pretty much the standard choice. For some reason, they don't add into that New Mere, Vanuatu, Tonga, Samoa or Tahiti. They may or they may not, but generally speaking, they narrow it down all the time to the ones they're either familiar with or ones that spring top of mind all the time because they've seen something about it. That they've seen promotion or media articles that talk about it and it stays with them, so that they narrow it down immediately to a number of smaller locations, a shorter number of locations, and then start doing the research and deciding which one of those they get. So we, as a region, have to be in that choice set. And to get in there, there's a lag. So there's a lot of studies that have been done. When you fail to make yourself known to the potential customer over a period of time, you drop off their consideration list. And so if you don't put the investment in, you'll find in time you simply become irrelevant and people forget about you. And so it takes a while to build that up. Now, the way in which we've been maintaining Hawke's Bay's involvement and Hawke's Bay's profile is through 3 different parts. One is the advertising that we do, increasingly digital. Secondly is the use of media articles which talk about the region as often as we can. A lot of work's been done in that area. And thirdly is events, things that spike the events, whether it be Fork, the Big Easy, the Marathon, Art Deco, etc. These all highlight it and ensure that people don't forget about this region. So the key issue is that we've got to continue to do that, and as the industry starts to continue to grow at quite extraordinary rates, we must make sure that we continue to be relevant and we continue to be heard in the New Zealand environment, which will become increasingly noisy with other people trying to get their messages there. And that's what Annie will talk about. So how are we going? Well, if we think back to when we actually, this council made the decision that they would fund Hawke's Bay tourism and get started on this journey, we had some ground to make up. So the figures that Annie will put up here now are looking at our growth compared to corresponding regions: Coromandel, Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Hawke's Bay, Nelson, Marlborough and Dunedin. So for that first 3-year period, you can see the growth rate. Now this is looking at the Commercial Accommodation Monitor. It's the only one that we can use that compares region to region. It doesn't cover all of the accommodation in any one region, but it's as good as we can get. At that stage, as you can see, Hawke's Bay didn't do that well. In fact, it was down 5% over those 3 years. And this is the lag effect of not having done anything prior to that time. It simply takes a long time before you start to be remembered in tourism. In the 2 years, 2014 and 2015, we suddenly see what has changed. So suddenly Hawke's Bay at 8% growth is now starting to match the best of the region. That's Coromandel and Nelson, and it's starting to better the other regions. And that's because we've now had, as a region and as an organisation, 5 years of consistent marketing, 5 years of hard work with the international and domestic media, ensuring that Hawke's Bay and its products and events constantly come to the public's attention. So this is the growth curve that we're on, and this is the growth curve that we want to maintain. If we stop doing that now, we'll simply go back to what was happening before, and the other regions will close over the gap that we leave behind us. So it's quite important at this stage just to recognise that we have got growth, we're competitive with other regions. In fact, we're doing better than a lot of other regions, and of comparable ones. And at this stage, the plan is to make that even better and ensure that from a regional point of view, Hawke's Bay tourism becomes, one of the stronger regions and a very strong tourism economy in the future. So with those few opening words, I'll just hand over to Annie.
Those are 2 sets of calendar years, aren't
yes,
they?
They are. Yes. Yeah, the first is 3 calendar years, the first 3 years of operation,
okay, yes.
and then that's the last 2 full calendar years.
Right,
Thank
you everyone, nice to see you all. Just to look at perhaps where we're at in terms of figures, etc. We have, as George has mentioned, we've had a pretty stellar summer so far, and the January results are in, and combining those commercial stats with the private household monitor, the region's up 5.4% in terms of visitor nights, and you can see from the graph really that we're on the right, we're certainly tracking in the right direction, and each month really in the last sort of 12 has been, we've seen growth. So we're certainly enjoying that, and the industry is, we had an industry meeting last night with 50 operators, and they've all had the best summer that they've ever had in tourism, so long may it last. The other key point really in this category is around our visitor spend, and so visitor spend now contributes $691 million into Hawke's Bay's economy. Those figures are year in March last year, but obviously a huge contributor and about 6% of GDP. So what we're looking at there is roughly around 200,000 extra nights being spent in the region last year, which is great. So just in terms of some highlights.
We take questions, or you want to go through?
Oh, maybe could we go through and then you'll be,
That's fine. Yep.
you'll get the full picture, Tom. The seasonal campaign in action. So as we identified last year in our plan, the seasonal campaign approach is how we want to tackle what we're doing. And just to give you a flavour of some of the work we've been doing, we've run quite heavy-weighted seasonal campaigns through the summer months, obviously promoting summer. And we've run a series of videos, both themed around, one themed around couples and one around young families. And we've had over 500,000 views of that content. And I'll talk a little more, a little later on about what we will do with the increased funding for next year, because this space is the space that we need to be in from a tourism point of view. We've been on billboards. So this is Miramar Golf Club at Wellington Airport, and also in Grafton in Auckland. So we've had two big billboard runs, both in November and in February, and actually the one in Miramar is still up, so I don't think we're paying for that, so it's good. So that's it's meant that, and this is very much in that motivational dreaming phase. This is about keeping people reminded that Hawke's Bay has is there, and it's visible, and it's an option for people to travel to in their consideration set. And these ones obviously these focus on the Cape Kidnappers and the cycle trails. Some of the other content work that we have done, we do, as George mentioned, the event space is hugely important for Hawke's Bay. We do have to provide reasons for people to visit. We can't just sit back and hope that the sun shines and that the gannets do their thing. We do have to give people reasons to come on top of that. And one of the things we tried with Art Deco this year, we filmed Art Deco Friday night, and we seeded that clip the next day on social media, and we had 88,000 views of that content the next day. And what this does, while it might not drive a booking, it creates talk and it creates chatter, and what it does is motivate people to think about popping that into their consideration set. This clip had nearly 1,000 shares, so that's really powerful content, and one way for us to really get our message out to a broader audience. We've just started to run our autumn campaign. So take a Te Mata peek at Hawke's Bay this autumn. So this ad will be running in North and South, Kia Ora, and I think Jetstar's magazines. We're doing some work with them. And it's really about painting that picture of what one can do in our environment and our landscape, which is pretty important. All of our activity leads back to our website, which has had a new skin, and I'm pleased to say that it's tracking well. This is just the sort of sticking plaster site and before we build on our major site. But what it has done, and we have brought the cities and districts right to the front in the homepage, and what we have seen, for example, with Wairoa, is that the traffic to Wairoa's pages have gone up about 600% because we've actually increased where these particular cities and regions sit on the site. So we are seeing much more increased traffic to each of those areas, which is one of the objectives that we had with the site. So I hope you've been on and had a look. Obviously it's a sort of a feedback gathering exercise at the moment, but the site is working very, very well and getting good coverage. Another initiative, we've been up in Wairoa this last 2 months, and this was something that we as a team went up to do and see some product. We had a fantastic trip, and yes, that is Fenton and the Mayor, and we had a brilliant session with Tūhoi and a number of operators up there about the opportunities in that region. And we have a few issues with boundaries with where Te Wairoa sits in Waikato Moana in terms of our website, but we're working through that because technically they sit in Eastland for some weird and strange reason. But we just genuinely felt that this is an absolutely untapped opportunity that we haven't done enough in, and it was a great start to a really, a good relationship now with a new tourism manager up there, and things are moving ahead like we've been doing in Central Hawke's Bay. So it's nice to see that is really starting. And
just to say that the Mayor does have some lawn as well. It's not it's in his garden, but he's a hell of a host.
Yeah,
Mayor
he certainly is. So just in terms of some of the events that have been going on, and particularly, obviously, we started the Little Easy last year in Central Hawke's Bay, and our work in Central Hawke's Bay with one of our staff who's the tourism coordinator there has been around establishing a series of events across the year for that region and district, and the Little Easy is the event that we run on Good Friday. Now the really nice thing about this event, we've brought it into the Big Easy fold, and we had about 200 riders, but 150 of them were from out of town. And so those riders were staying in local motels. They'd either stayed in Hastings or Napier and had driven down to do the event. But we had Canadians, we had all sorts of people. And I guess what we're trying to do with these events is really uplift that out-of-town number. And the Little Easy certainly did that on Good Friday. The weather was rubbish, but they came out, and we were also raising money for the new bridge to go over the Tuki to create the full loop track. So, we raised, I think the team raised about $15,000. So, a great day ahead on Friday. The Big Easy, which again wet, very poor weather forecasting, but we had close to 1,300 riders on the Big Easy from Church Road to Black Barn. They braved the weather. It was a bit like the Blitz, and they got out there and did the ride. And I guess this is another event that is really starting to get good traction. You know, it was nice to hear from Moteliers last night to say they had many groups in for the Big Easy, and that is obviously the point of why we do and create and start these events. So this was big help from the Regional Council, from Napier and Hastings Councils to run this event. So it's one on our calendar at Easter, which happens to be our busiest weekend of the year. So in terms of what's around the corner, we really are in with the extra funding. It is about upweighting the seasonal campaign. We've said all along that that was our objective, to run a consistent and integrated seasonal campaign across the 4 seasons, and the additional money will allow us to really push into new mediums and much more frequently and at a much greater scale. So it does mean that we aren't just in one publication once a year. It means we can be repeatedly in Kiora every season on billboards doing the digital work we said. But I just wanted to share with you some of the ideas that we've got and the extra funding will allow us to do. So digital billboards, I'm sure many of you have travelled overseas and you see them and there's a hell of a lot of clutter and you see these fantastic digital ads roaming when you're driving into major cities. We don't have a lot of this in New Zealand yet, and the beauty of us being first in a lot of these categories is that there is no clutter and Hawke's Bay gets first mover advantage. So there's some digital billboard sites in Auckland, increasingly Wellington and Christchurch, and we really want to look to show off Hawke's Bay in that digital moving live way. The ad shells on the left, they are also live, so we can actually be reporting the weather here. So you can be sitting on a bus in a dreary Auckland day or Wellington, and we can be showing what Hawke's Bay looks like, you know, for the weekend ahead or whatever that may be. So there's amazing ability for us to share content in a really rich and provocative way. Airport display and in-flight entertainment, you know, particularly with Jetstar and their network in Australia, this is something we really want to talk to them about, is how we start talking about Hawke's Bay to their passengers within the Australian network, but also around the other services within New Zealand, but also at the terminals. You've probably all noticed ads in terminals waiting for bags, etc. But this is another space we haven't been in before, but we want to be able to do that as well. Video I've mentioned, but show me, don't tell me. This is absolutely critical to what we do. 69% of all consumer online traffic is now video, and you know, we increasingly, this is, you know, we just had someone out on the Big Easy, and we've cut 5 different video segments to be shared socially and on our website. So you can no longer, as a business in tourism, just, you know, sit back and run a pretty ad. You've really got to seriously show people what they can do, and the ability for in this space is pretty impressive. And just I'll talk about Facebook in a minute, but the other option in here is television. So for the first time, we may well get an option to be placing some of our commercials in a very targeted way around programs and audiences that fit with what we're doing. We are looking at, we'll have a Hawke's Bay episode on a new show, a travel show that's starting on TV1, I think in June, and so there's a Hawke's Bay episode dedicated. So whether we advertise around that or the series, it's obviously about travel and people are interested in travel, so therefore it's a relatively good target. On Demand's also a really good place. You're pretty captured if you're sitting and watching TV at home on your laptop. In terms of social, and this might sound all a bit frightening, but this space is incredible in terms of what it can now deliver, and the targeting ability. If you imagine that, you know, Facebook knows every single detail about every single person that's on Facebook. We give our information away very freely, which means for us as marketers, we can target and tag those people pretty carefully. For example, with Art Deco, we could go onto Facebook without getting the names of people who'd bought tickets and serve up more Hawke's Bay content to those people about what else they could do in Hawke's Bay while they're here. So there's lots of ways and means for us to activate in those social spaces. And one of the other things just recently we've run, and you've probably seen more of them if you're on Facebook, they're called carousel ads, and we've run a number of family campaigns promoting our family products. And, you know, there'll be up to 5. We promoted Splash Planet, it had 12,000 hits to their website off the back of just one Facebook ad. So there's huge engagement, and it's a huge opportunity that's just really starting to hit its straps. So that will be a lot of the work that we choose to do going forward. All this activity will be reflected in our new site, the current one, but obviously when we have our new site, which we're hoping for around that October time, and so that there's a very seamless feel to the work that people see or the advertising they see, whether it's in Auckland or Wellington, right through if they're picking up Cure on the plane to when they arrive in Hawke's Bay and use the site for booking or searching. So really important that it's integrated. Just a couple of key things coming up. The marathon, which I hope you've all entered. There is a 10K for those who aren't keen to do the full. But this event is a game changer for the month of May will now go from being a pretty average month for visitors and tourism to a stellar month. There's nearly 3,500 people registered, 85% are from out of town, 100 Australians, and town is full. So 14th of May that weekend, we are looking for accommodation, so if you want to pop your house on Airbnb, that'd be great. But this event is getting huge traction within particularly the Air New Zealand network, and the power of Air New Zealand as a marketer has really helped to drive the registrations for this event. It starts on Marine Parade, it finishes at Salini with a very large sort of festival, food and wine festival, not just with their wine but with many other wineries and our food producers. So it is a showcase. We're delighted that at the numbers, there's very few events that come here that have an 85% visitor lead versus a 15% local. That's sort of slightly unheard of, and we've got it for 3 years. So it's a brilliant one to have on our calendar, which we're delighted we managed to get into May and not February. The other event that obviously is a big part of our team's effort, but Winter Fork kicks off on the 3rd of June. The program's out in a couple of weeks. There's 45 winter events on that calendar. So there's plenty happening in the event space and onwards, and it's interesting, we were with the industry last night, huge amounts of actually planning now for next February. Te Matatini and Art Deco fall right next to each other. And one event will have 20,000 people here, and one will have close to sort of 5,000 people odd staying for those 4 nights for Art Deco. So February next year already is booked up for many of the industry, which is great to hear. But also January and March also are looking really strong. So we haven't for a long time had forecasting out that far in advance for the next summer season. So it's looking very, very positive. And just lastly, just to let you know, on our Māori board position, we have applications closed on Friday, and we've had several applicants, and so we'll be going through an interview process in the next few weeks to determine that position. So that's it from me. Any questions?
I'll kick it off. The interest in Wairoa, your trip up there was very well received, and you obviously went and had a look at a lot of product. What do Wairoa District Council need to do to get the best bang for buck out of leveraging Hawke's Bay tourism? It's a fairly direct question, but it'd be quite nice to understand, because they're keen to do something, but they don't seem to get there. That's my view.
Well, I mean, one of the most obvious thing is, there isn't a lot of accommodation in Wairoa. There just isn't. And but where they've actually excelled over the summer is in the freedom camping, motorhoming market, not the nasty ones with wicked campers, but and that actually could be a space that Wairoa could seriously own. If they put great facilities in for freedom campers, particularly with the rocket launch potential that's coming, that could be, and they should own it. They should be the most friendly freedom camping town in New Zealand. And when we were up there, we were wandered down to the beach at Mahia. I mean, it was full of camper vans, and there were some good facilities, but they could really own that space. And that's not about building big infrastructure and hotels, etc. It's about good shower blocks and good loos, and if you give those sorts of people a place to feel safe and to be able to have a wash and go to the bathroom, they will naturally get a huge number of people through that area. And the rocket launch business will provide, a real reason for them to come. So that is essential. We had a great session in Waikare Moana, and I think, we've got to make sure that management of the track and what that experience is remains as good as it should be, and that is really essential. That is the gem really for Hawke's Bay to have that, and whether the road is sealed or not, I'm not a big proponent of the road, because I actually believe we should be bringing people in from this end, not through that road from Rotorua, and actually starting them in Hawke's Bay and driving them and experiencing Wairoa first and then up into the lake. But there's some fantastic product, and there were a lot of new people, people from Auckland who'd moved down, they bought the place at Moeri that, they'd turned into a sort of a 5-room homestay accommodation. So there actually is some fabulous product, but it's how we kind of put it all together and package it up so that people understand what there is to do there.
So is that a role you could help with? Or?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Councillor Belford.
I have, if I may, 3 focused questions, given that we are devoting the time to this. I appreciate the slide you had up at the beginning in terms of the regional comparison, but a number of times I've asked for just a simple display of how our numbers compare to the national numbers in terms of visitorship and what have you. And I went through here, and it seems it would be simple enough to provide that, but it never seems to make it into the written material here. So as far as I'm concerned, we still don't have a regular picture as to whether we're riding the wave simply, or whether we're getting ahead of the wave.
Okay.
And so I would just once more ask, could we not see some comparison like that
Sure.
in these quarterly reports?
Perhaps just to explain that, if we put Queenstown, Auckland and Wellington in there, it would distort it to the extent that their growth is greater. They spend it.
I'm not so much concerned about that regional comparison.
Right.
It's just
The total.
what's the big picture here in terms of if more and more visitors are piling in into New Zealand or whatever, then I would assume, you guys are tactically brilliant as far as I'm concerned, and but I'd still like to see what are we measuring this against.
One of the
Yeah.
things, one of the things I can, it's a little difficult because we don't, coming into Hawke's Bay, we only know, the CAM stats give us an international number and a domestic number. They don't break down, obviously where that's from. But I can tell you from January, and perhaps this is what you would like. So Hawke's Bay was one of 5 regions with the highest visitor performance in January, alongside Rotorua, Canterbury, Queenstown, and Auckland. So that's
all.
so yeah, so we had a huge lift in visitors, in the top 5 for New Zealand. So perhaps it's as simple as that statement.
What we were trying to do is compare like with like, so you can get some sort of sense of other
understand
regions that are
Yeah.
spending. We're in the same spend set. That's part of the issue. Sometimes we just get swamped by the size of those other regions, but we can provide the data. It's no problem.
If I could take you to page 46. That's where the numbers are sort of summarized on guest nights and what have you. And the commercial accommodation is sort of the smaller chunk, it appears, of the 103,000. I'm looking at that 2016 column
Yeah.
there. And then you go down below toward the bottom, private household monitor, total visitor nights, which I assume is the same as basically total guest nights, really, is 510, right? And that adds up to total nights spent in Hawke's Bay of 673. You see where I am there?
Not quite, but
Page,
I don't have your full report, but I can.
well, I guess my point is that out of total nights spent in Hawke's Bay in 2000, I guess this is the month of January as a for instance, 500,000+ of the 673 were private household monitor nights.
Yep.
Right? And in the preceding page, you say the major reason for visiting Hawke's Bay was visiting friends or family, 89% of total nights. I'm aware of, I've had 2 visitors in this time frame. Councillor Graham's daughter is visiting him, and all of those would be situations of people coming to see friends and family. And so it would appear that 90%, a very high percentage of visitors to Hawke's Bay are arguably not coming because of anything you're doing. They're coming to see, Uncle Rex or Uncle Tom or whatever. And this issue has been raised, I think, before, as to, is all of this, I mean, none of the people who came to visit me came, and I suspect his daughter didn't come because of anything that you guys are doing, right? And, okay.
No, it's
She was
and
reminded
I think,
that you lived in
I
Hawke's Bay
think
by the
also,
advertising.
Councillor Belford, January is a very family, it's Christmas. So January and December are 2 months that you do see a much higher skew. But, I would argue that a number of people stay with friends and family and come to events that are on here. So they choose not to pay for commercial accommodation because they've got a relative or a friend that they stay with. So
Just on that, there's the national stats have a category, VFR, visiting friends and family. It's a legitimate tourism market, because people will stay with friends and family to save money, and they'll tick that when they come. You're asked when you come into the country why you're staying there. You say I'm visiting friends and family. Generally, it can be a mix of reasons. Very often, it's because they want to visit the location, and they'll use friends and family as to do both at the same time.
Okay,
What national tourism boards do is they claim half of it,
right.
and there's no logic to that at all, other than it sounds fair, and you probably do the same here.
Yeah, okay. The last question I have is, you're probably aware that the CEO of the Tourism Export Council has called for a moratorium on irrigation projects, a 5-year moratorium on irrigation projects, given that we're building a dam that is still intended to be 35% dairying. Would you disassociate yourself from that
it's a very
industry
good
position?
question. The body that we belong to, the New Zealand Tourism Industry Association, has come out and not in agreement with that view. So it's a view held by the Export Council alone.
Who don't represent us.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you. Nice to see you both, as always. My question is with regard to your independent director appointment with special skill sets, not your married director because we don't appoint on race, but I'm interested, who's on that appointment panel and how are you getting the independence in there?
At this stage, we're just waiting for one final regional council person to sit on that, but it's so far George will sit on that panel. Neil Barber, who's the chair of the Industry Association, which technically appoints the position. And we've actually asked the chairman of the regional council, but there will be one other.
Councillor Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Firstly, I think you guys are doing an absolutely fantastic job, and I'm pleased Councillor Belford also said that. I'm interested in a couple of things. One, certainly my daughter would come back and stay with me because it's free, but she loves to come back to Art Deco too. So I think having these events is something which attracts our families, which generally don't live here, back. I'm not saying any of my kids are coming back to run the marathon yet, but there's a possibility they would. What I'm really interested in though is, I go to Napier, which of course is the gem in our tourism crown, and you see it's huge activity and it's wonderful, and it's a wonderful, vibrant place to be, and when there's all the activity there with all the young people and tourists. How does it impact? I'm really interested to know jobs. So perhaps we need to get one of our economists to have a look at that. How does all that excitement relate to not just spend, but to jobs and downward economic activity in Hawke's Bay? So I really want to get a handle on that as well.
Yeah, we have a little bit of data on that, and all I'd say also with the spend figures, Napier is a concentrated hub of tourism activity, but actually the lion's share of spend is in the Hastings district. So, and that is because a huge number of the tourism assets sit outside of Napier. And so, yes, people come into Napier, but actually they're spending a lot of their money in and around the region. So there are estimates at the moment that jobs in tourism are about 5,000, but we haven't broken that down to where they obviously sit within each region. We can do that. But yeah, we can do some more work in that space.
We'll work around the table. Councillor Scott and then Councillor
Thank you,
Logan.
Mr Chairman, and thank you both for presenting that report. I'd just like to check the difference between the table on page 43 and 51 on monetisation. Is one an updated figure, or there's just a fairly significant discrepancy between the two figures?
Sorry, I can't. I've got my glasses on. 43. Yes, the figures, the MB figures, we've had they've reforecast their figures since we set our.
Yeah. So this is this is actually a target. So you have actually upped the target according to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Thank
we
you.
have lots
I
of
just
fun
want to
doing that.
ask around that, because you do mention the private house monitor, but what we are missing seems to me, and thank you also for that comparison with the commercial monitor, because it does compare apples with apples, is the rent-a-batch, etc., especially Airbnb, which seems to me huge. And having just experienced it in Auckland, obviously choice would be a motel. It was a family funeral, couldn't get anything suitable, went on Airbnb, and actually within the area that we needed to be found 5 extremely good prospects and stayed in a very good place. But have you got any assessment of the size of that particular part? And do we know what the comparison is region for region, as people would use that? And isn't that spend actually the most important figure we should be looking at?
It's interesting, it's a good question. So the cell phone data, what that tells us is roughly that the numbers we get roughly, it sits around just under 4 million for when we look at CAM, the commercial stats, and the private household monitor. When we look at the cell phone data, it's about another 1 million nights that aren't accounted for. So there is a huge number of people that have not been attributed to, and we've got to be a little bit careful, because not all those people are here for tourism purposes. They are here with a cell phone from Auckland. They might be here for a meeting and they're leaving that day, or they're staying a night, or whatever it might be. But there are another 1 million odd nights that aren't captured in our reports that the cell phone data is suggesting to us. So it's 1 million visitor nights. So it is, and that research project is just underway, and now there are 12 other regions who've joined it. So now we can actually start to look at each region and see where we're at. I think to George's point, when we look at comparable regions, it's important that we don't compare ourselves with an Auckland or a Queenstown, because we're not quite in that same category. They get a huge number of corporate visitors to Auckland. We don't have that sort of travel market. So when you look at hotel occupancy, Auckland's for the summer, they're up at 80 to 90%. We've had a great season, but our occupancy is just under 70%. So everyone's saying we should be well up in the 90s, but actually when you look across the board, it's certainly not as high as some of those other regions. So there's still lots of opportunity. So yes, there are some holes in those nights. There are already 300 properties listed on Airbnb in Hawke's Bay. And and actually lots of our commercial properties are also listing on Airbnb. Yeah. I think Airbnb is going to get a bit of, we'll soon see if there's some regulation thrown in the mix, because obviously they're not paying commercial rates, and there's a whole bunch of things that are just brewing around how we address Airbnb. But consumers love it. It's an easy way to book and experience something very local, so it's not going away.
Is given that overall spend, is that not one of the which should be one of the major focuses that we should be on, rather than just visitor nights?
Absolutely.
We know we're missing
Absolutely.
quite a lot of information.
Yeah. Yep. What Airbnb's doing, it's a bit of a game changer for the tourism industry, and you could read it. It's like Uber did to the taxi industry. It's basically anybody can put their product on, and it's just what the net is doing to marketing and distribution at the moment. So I think we're all going to need to come to terms with it, but our traditional measures become less and less comprehensive, unfortunately, and spend will become more important. Yeah.
I'll keep moving around the table. I'll end up with Councillor Barker. Shortly, Councillor Pipe.
Just a quick follow-up to that then. With the curious data that we're getting, when are you likely to include that into your reports here? Because we haven't got those.
No, and I purposely didn't put it in. They've had they've been reworking the data, and so before we put it out there, we want to make sure it's completely robust. So at the next meeting, we'll have a curious report. We do want to run some workshops for anyone that's interested. So I know Councillor Bevan, you've talked to me about that before, and I think that would be quite good because there's actually huge opportunity in that data to look at, actually planning of transport and infrastructure and other things within regions. So it's a very powerful tool.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Thank you. I've got two questions. One is a specific one and then one's a more general one. The first one is, on your way through your excellent report, Annie, you mentioned about the marathon for 3 years. You never explained why the 3 years. Could you just tell us what that's about?
Oh, so the region will be hosting it for 3 years.
And after 3 years it disappears.
Oh well, it's up for renewal. So fingers crossed. But it's hit all expectations this year. They had an initial target of I think 2,000 runners, and it's gone well beyond that already. And we've got another month of registrations. Queenstown's basically the company that own the event, Lagardère. They've just been bought by Ironman International, so it's very much part of a massive international network. They will continue to run it here if it continues to be successful. So it's at this stage it's a 3-year contract.
So just
council, I just want to know whether he keeps training for 3 years.
Yeah, you've got time.
Sure, I got time. But anyway, so the point is that the marathon is owned by someone else, it's not owned by us. That's what I've got. Right, thank you. The second point is a more general, which is that's about a product which brings people here. And I said this before, but I'll repeat myself. In the 70s, Queenstown had hotels half built, cranes stuck all over the place. It was going nowhere, and I couldn't believe that they're in such a hole because they fabulous mountains, fabulous everything, and people just didn't visit. And they in the end figured that they had to have a product that people wanted to go, and a spread of product, and it had to continue to evolve and develop. So it seems to me that the marketing is all very well, but you've got to have the goods. And so my concern is, my question is, what are we doing to develop the goods and the products at the other end to refresh them, update them, add to them, and so on? Because if we want to have tourism growth, we've got to have the goods to sell. That's the fundamental part of that.
I think there's a couple of things in there. I mean, air capacity is something that's hugely intrinsic to Queenstown's success, and us having Jetstar now will naturally boost arrivals. From a product point of view, I think, yes, you're right, you have to continually evolve, and I think that cycle trails have probably been the best thing that's happened to Hawke's Bay in the last 5 to 10 years. But people also don't know a lot about our products too, so we've still got a job to do to educate them on what we've got, and also talk about those products in our off-season. So we might be full, December, January, February, March, but actually through that low season, the weather here is still pretty good compared to many other places. So how do we shift up a gear and change our product offering in the off-season to sort of flatten out the curve fractionally? And it's hard, but looking at some of the product that we saw up in Te Wairoa, for example, there's huge opportunity in that part of the world.
Sure.
And, just getting people from Hawke's Bay to visit and hit the lake for a day or Mahia, etc. So there are opportunities in that space. There's a lot in that food and wine and the provenance of our food, and I think the region needs to seriously own the fact that it is truly the fruit bowl of New Zealand. We don't do enough in that space. We've got incredible product, but we don't connect the dots so a visitor can necessarily experience that easily. So Fork is the start of that, but there's a whole lot of opportunities in that food and wine space. Food is increasingly more important to how people travel, particularly international visitors, when they can see an apple on a tree and pick it and so on. And particularly out of the China market, what we're seeing is that our fresh seafood is something that they are desperate to catch themselves and then cook and eat and gut and whatever they want to do with it, or just go down to the fish shop and actually look at the range of seafood and food that we have available. So food's a really important thing, and it's obviously a huge asset for Hawke's Bay, so it's something we think we should really start to jump on and own in that space.
We recently had a bit of a strategic review of Fork, and one of the opportunities we think that really sits well in this region is to go deeper into the food story here. We don't celebrate the first harvest of the wine, which most wine countries do. There could be all sorts of things. We could be involving the people who pick the wine with the tourists who want to be there when it's done. And particularly in the horticultural industry, there are people who like to go much deeper into those industries and actually not necessarily participate, but see how the whole thing goes. And that's really going deeper into the food chain, which people want to understand more and more these days. And so we think the strengths this region has allow us to go far deeper into the story and provide more and more a variety of products. There's all sorts of opportunities there. So that's sort of the next level. And that would apply also to the cycling side of it. And the other thing, Waikaremoana is absolutely an untapped story, and that has to be it's a jewel in the crown. It's the closest of the great walks to the major population of New Zealand, and it's probably the least used. So,
Mr. Mohi, and then we'll wrap it up.
So you have to ask a question. So do you realise how impressed I have been over the last 6 months as the interim Māori member?
Just who's got that phone? Could they turn it off or drop it in a bucket or something, please?
Just repeat myself. How impressed I have been as your interim Māori member in the last 6 months or so with the enthusiasm of you two and the staff, and a real insight into what Hawke's Bay tourism is about. So I congratulate you on that. Just a couple of comments. There are 16 accommodation outlets in Porongaho as an example, and some of the things you've been talking about today added value. You know, they need your enthusiasm down there to keep them encouraged, because they're a little bit like parts of Wairoa. They're right on the edge of Hawke's Bay, and the event that we had down there with New Zealand Māori tourism, they were just overwhelmed with enthusiasm themselves. And just in terms of relative staying, I had my daughter and 3 Hawaiians come over the weekend, and I thought how wonderful, they're coming to see me, and I didn't see them at all. They were out on the bikes and left the free accommodation at Ocean Beach in a mess. So it does happen. So yeah, once again, thank you for the opportunity of being on your board, and today's after this meeting, we've been at the last meeting, probably I'll attend. Thank you.
thank you for your contribution too, Councillor Mohi.
You happy to move? Thank you, Councillor Scott. We have a seconder for that. Thank you, Councillor Bevan. You wish to speak?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much for this report, and it's very positive, and I do focus on the impact of that spend in Hawke's Bay, which is really what we're looking for. That's the outcome, isn't it? Visitor nights are only a measure, and what we want is what it does to this economy. So it's good to get this. And Mr. Chairman, I would like to note that this is a very timely report, because we are, one of the items on the agenda is to confirm the annual plan. So I think that being able to get this at this stage and actually get those updates on 2 major events that have happened recently, the Art Deco and the Easter Big Easy, is actually very helpful for us to actually see just where we are going economically with tourism. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Very little to add to Councillor Scott's comments. As always, your reports are fulsome and well received by us, and look forward to further engagement with you.
Councillor Graham.
Yeah, I just want to endorse that. You know, there's a whole lot of activities in Hawke's Bay, but by themselves they can't promote like they need to get to the international market, and I think you guys do that for everyone really well, to help to turn tourism as a commodity and as a whole generic package into one of our major industries in Hawke's Bay, and we need that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion in. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, no. Carried. Thank you. And thank you, guys. Okay, we've got a few minutes before morning tea. Let's go to item 7. Excuse me, affixing the common seal. Is someone happy to